Thank you, everyone. We might get started. So firstly, this workshop is being recorded to ensure that those of us who are unable to attend live will be able to view the presentations later. So welcome, everybody, and thank you so much for joining us here today. So firstly, Bujari Gamarawa, or good day. I acknowledge the traditional custodians of the land where I'm facilitating this webinar from, the Gadigal people, and acknowledge the traditional owners of the lands that each of you are joining from today. I recognise the Gadigal people as part of the oldest continuing culture in the world. We deeply respect strong and resilient First Nations women as knowledge holders of dreaming and songlines and as leaders in their families and communities. We strive to work alongside them as we commit ourselves towards improved opportunities and outcomes for all First Nations women and girls. I pay my respects to all elders, past, present and future, to my Aboriginal colleagues, and acknowledge that this land always was and always will be Aboriginal land. Before we proceed to talk about financial, economic and elder abuse, I want to raise that some of what will be discussed today may be triggering to victim survivors. If any of the topics raised today cause you issues or concern, please contact 1800-RESPECT or Lifeline on 131144. We would love to hear from you during this webinar, so if you have any questions or comments, please type them into the chat and we will redirect them to speakers at the end of the session. Today, you're meant to hear from one of our colleagues who unfortunately has been taken ill. We thought COVID was over, but it's still disrupting us. So I will provide a little brief overview just of Women New South Wales and the Premier's Department. So I'm Tanya Smythe. I'm the Director of Women New South Wales, and my team are facilitating this webinar today. So Women New South Wales is the lead government agency responsible for improving the lives of all women in New South Wales by achieving justice and equality through policy, innovation and collaboration. The New South Wales Women's Strategy aims to live and work for women to live and work in a safe and fair society where they are treated with respect and dignity, have equitable access to services, resources, opportunities and protections that enable them to thrive. There are three pillars of the New South Wales Women's Strategy: economic participation and advancement, health and wellbeing, and participation and empowerment. The New South Wales Government commitment for women is featured through multiple strategies that support the New South Wales Women's Strategy and that the Women's Strategy contributes to. The New South Wales Women's commitment is one of the New South Wales Women's Strategy commitments is around gender equality action plans. All New South Wales government agencies will be developing a gender equality action plan to advance gender equality for people in New South Wales and the New South Wales public sector workforce. So currently we're proceeding with a pilot. 2 agencies in New South Wales are participating in that. And next year we'll commence with all agencies working on a gender equality action plan. That plan will outline their commitments through the services they deliver across New South Wales and also regarding gender equality in their own workforce. The strategy in New South Wales strives to improve outcomes for women and girls and a society where economic abuse is not tolerated. As we work towards this, we've developed some resources and established programs, including grant programs that support the empowerment of women. Some of the investments that the government has made through Women New South Wales includes the Return to Work Pathways program, which is a grant program that supports organisations to help women enter the workforce or to improve their outcomes in economic participation. The Investing in Women funding program supports all three pillars of the strategy. And the Gender Equality Budget Statement is a piece of work that Treasury deliver each year that outlines the gender equality actions through the budget. So it looks at all of the budget items and where that will influence women and girls. And two programs that have been announced this year include the Future Women's Job Academy and the Working Women's Centre, which Women New South Wales will be supporting. The Future Women Jobs Academy will see over 1,000 women walk through the Future Women's program, and that will help them to acquire a role and to seek employment, or it may help them move from a role that is not secure into something more secure. Working Women's Centres will support women in regards to their wages and issues including sexual harassment in the workplace, and that will be available for all women that are not supported by a union. Women New South Wales also looks after toolkits and resources, and this includes the Women's Financial Toolkit. And this toolkit is one of the contributions to combating economic abuse through the provision of information. So the toolkit's broken up into three categories: everyday money matters, help with unexpected issues, and planning for the future. And there's a link there if anybody would like to look at that. And help with unexpected issues is support for things such as losing employment or needing to move house, or things around disaster recovery. So some of the key issues are there, including help with making complaints, support for gambling, and avoiding scams. There's information around financial abuse, different organisations that can be accessed. And the Financial Abuse Support Toolkit is also featured in the toolkit. There's support for, there's information about support that women can access if they're affected by financial abuse or financial stress. And there's just some broader information about Women New South Wales, some contacts to access some of those toolkits. Thank you. I'll just let Olivia take control now. Thank you. So I'd now like to introduce our first speaker, who is Rebecca Glenn. Rebecca is the founder and CEO of the Centre for Women's Economic Safety. The Centre for Women's Economic Safety aims to raise awareness of economic abuse as a form of domestic and family violence and advocate for structural and systems change to support women's economic safety. Rebecca has worked across the corporate, government and not-for-profit sectors in the financial capability and communications. She has led numerous initiatives to improve financial well-being, including at the Commonwealth Bank, where she was a key member of the Domestic and Family Violence Working Group, as campaign director for Money Smart Week, and as founding CEO of not-for-profit Financial Literacy Australia. Welcome, Rebecca, and thank you for joining us today.
Thank you, Tanya, and thank you to Women New South Wales for all of the work you do, but in particular for making the time to have this event today with this focus. I would also like to acknowledge the traditional custodians of the land I'm joining you from, that of the Darug and Gundungurra people, and pay my respect to elders past, present, and to any First Nations people joining us today. The theme for this year's Economic Abuse Awareness Day is counting the cost. And so what I want to share with you is what some of those costs are, some of the consequences of economic abuse. I'm going to share a lived experience illustration of that, as well as some warning signs or indicators of economic abuse. and a brief overview of what the Centre for Women's Economic Safety is doing to address that issue, some of the support that we provide. But let's start with what we're actually talking about. So economic abuse is a pattern of behaviour which includes financial abuse, where one person controls their partner or family member's economic resources in a way that limits their autonomy and undermines their economic well-being. So when we talk about economic resources, we're talking about money and finances, which is when we're talking about financial abuse. But economic resources are broader than money and finance. So it also includes things like transport and food, property, employment and study. And what we find is that economic abuse is a really key tactic of coercive control. And so as we prepare for the criminalisation of coercive control in intimate partner relationships, at least in this state, it's really important that we build on our understanding of how this can work and what it can look like. So most of the work that we do is with women experiencing economic abuse from a current or former intimate partner. But we also see economic abuse via the victim's own family or their partner's family. We know it's a serious problem in other contexts also, including elder abuse and the abuse of women and others who rely on carers. And we also know that it's not always that you neatly fit one category or the other. There is some overlap there as well, but I'm really looking forward to hearing from New South Wales Ageing and Disability Commissioner Robert Fitzgerald. But drawing on our work at the Centre for Women's Economic Safety, I did want to start with a lived experience case study. What I'm going to share with you is really just a short and little snapshot of a much richer and more diverse set of experiences from this one woman who's on our lived experience advisory panel. There are so many more experiences. Yes, we see lots of patterns in common, but every story is unique. And so as I share this story with you, I want you to keep that in mind. So bear with me while I read in her own words. So we had 2 children together and things started to fall apart pretty quickly because of his coercively controlling behaviour, which included image-based abuse. He co-opted his family and friend into the abuse and things escalated to the point where I was unable to work and I was terrified he was going to run off with the kids. So I had to leave my employment to protect them. When I reported the abuse to police, they took out an intervention order and he was removed from the house. At that point, the economic abuse escalated. He'd been deceitful, abusive and controlling for the entire relationship when it came to finances, and I thought that the end of the relationship might be the end of that. However, when the domestic violence order was put on, the perpetrator ceased paying the mortgage for the family home, and he told his best friend, who was living in our second property, to stop paying his rent. At that time, both mortgages were well ahead by a few $1,000s, and so for about 3 or 4 months, no mortgage payments were made on either property out of our current income. The redraw facility was covering the lack of payments. But then the bank started issuing letters of demand. Initially, we were granted some hardship relief, but then the perpetrator could see this helped me, and so he said he wouldn't agree to it, and then the bank started harassing me again. I had to spend so much time making my case to the bank and proving the abuse I was experiencing before they finally agreed to another financial hardship agreement, this time without the knowledge of the perpetrator. Part of this agreement was proof that the properties were being listed for sale, which I provided. When the property sold, I thought I'd at least have some money to start again. But that's when the legal system's abuse started. I should have been able to buy a new property with the proceeds, but he dragged out family law proceedings, costing me money on all these unnecessary things. So pretty much all that money went on lawyers. The private rent I pay now is more than what we were paying on that mortgage. There are so many costs that aren't counted when it comes to domestic abuse. All the time I've had to take off work, the inability to advance my career, and now living with housing insecurity, which is more expensive than the secure housing I used to have. I'm really scared moving forward. So some of the key takeouts that I'd really hope you get from just that small illustration is, like most victim survivors, Lily has got a lot going on. She's experiencing multiple forms of abuse and she's trying to manage them. The separation actually results in an escalation of abuse. And importantly, that the true costs of economic abuse go beyond that immediate impact. They are cascading and compounding. You know, the time-consuming nature of managing the abuse, the actions she'd had to take for her and her children's safety, which impacted her employment. We also saw there the role of banks potentially in providing relief or making things more difficult. We can see how family law is weaponised to waste resources, and the impact on housing, which has a whole additional set of consequences in its own right. So Commonwealth Bank recently commissioned Deloitte Access Economics to model the cost of economic abuse to victim survivors and the economy. And that report found that the direct cost to victim survivors is about $5.7 billion a year. And we know that doesn't include the full suite of post-separation abuse tactics. And it's a further $5.2 billion in costs to the economy. So whether you're moved by the injustice of the human rights breaches or the economic argument, you can see that we need to do something. And of course, that is what drives us every day. So our mission is to support women experiencing economic abuse in the context of domestic and family violence. And we do that in two main ways. Firstly, we connect women with appropriate information, services and assistance to support their economic safety. And secondly, we work to reduce the impact of economic abuse. And we do that by sharing their lived experiences with the intent of contributing to an improvement in both social, service and system responses to it. So what does that actually look like? So we undertake a number of activities. Firstly, in terms of how we support women, we run money clinics, which provide free, confidential one-on-one sessions with violence-informed financial specialists. We also publish the National Financial Safety website to support victim survivors' informed decision-making. In terms of the activity that we undertake to reduce the impact of economic abuse, we advocate for social service and system change, as I mentioned, and some of the things that we're currently calling for, we want to see healthy money relationships and finances covered in respectful relationships curriculum. Some of the early prototypes of respectful relationships curriculum don't even mention money, and we think that that's a missed opportunity. We also want to see property protection orders in domestic violence intervention orders. And we want to see financial safety by design across the financial and essential services sector. So last year we published a paper called Design to Disrupt, Reimagining Banking Products to Improve Financial Safety. And that was really about saying, we know that products are being misused to perpetrate abuse. What might products and services look like if we designed with financial safety in mind from the start? And we also undertake a range of education, training and public communication activities. Recently we partnered with Insight Exchange, another New South Wales-based initiative, to create a free 23-minute training video. So we also provide fee-for-service training, but this video is 23 minutes. It's available on our website and it's free for anyone who's looking to learn more about economic abuse in the context of domestic and family violence. And an extension of all of that work is raising awareness. And of course, we talked about the fact that it was Economic Abuse Awareness Day yesterday. And that's an initiative that we first brought to Australia for the first time 2 years ago. All of the work that we do is informed by lived experiences of economic abuse, both through the insights that we see every day on the ground because of money clinics, but also because of the Lived Experience Advisory Panel. So I thought I'd share with you a piece of work that came out of the Lived Experience Advisory Panel, and that was we worked with the panel to identify what they thought that their friends or family or colleagues might have noticed about them before they'd said anything when they were experiencing economic abuse. And so we came up with this list. This is the top 10 most common things that they shared with us. So when a person is making excuses not to or doesn't want to participate in social activities that cost money. It might be that you see their partner getting new things, but they're not. Maybe the partner is always well dressed and gets new clothes, has a nice car, but they don't. It might be that they never seem to have enough money. They appear stressed or distressed about their financial situation. In social conversations, they may defer to their partner about financial matters when they arise. It could be that they leave a job or employment or study that you thought they liked or were enjoying. They might work in their partner's business or a family business but don't seem to be enjoying it. They might talk often about tension with their partner over money. They might say things like, well, I don't really know about that. I don't know about our finances. And they might be super vigilant about getting receipts. Now, I do want to caution that none of those things is evidence of economic abuse happening, but it certainly might be cause for concern. Some of those things, could simply be that someone gets stressed about money. So I do just want to sort of say, introduce a note of caution with that. So it's one thing to raise awareness in general, but we also need to support people who, as a result of awareness raising, might now be questioning what's happening in their own relationship, or potentially questioning what is happening in the relationship of a friend or colleague or family member. And so before I wrap up, I did want to share with you some resources that the Centre for Women's Economic Safety has produced and are publicly available. So starting from the top left, I've got some QR codes there. The money clinics, you can learn more about that if you just scan that QR code. Importantly, money clinics, really the only eligibility criteria for money clinics is that you're a woman, non-binary or feminine identifying and residing in Australia. So there's no age requirement, there's no income or assets test, no geographic eligibility criteria, no visa requirements, no minimum or maximum number of sessions. Basically, the intent with that is we want to keep the barriers to support as low as possible. So you can make an appointment directly online, or if you're working in the sector supporting someone and you have their consent to do so, you can make an appointment for them just by using that online link. The QR code to the right there will take you through to our financial safety website. So it offers factual financial information, but with that domestic and family violence lens. So it's primarily aimed at women concerned about finances in their relationship, excuse me. But it also has information for people who might be concerned about someone they know. There's also a range of tools there are links to a range of tools from that website and a national directory of services. So if you're looking for support in New South Wales in relation to sort of potentially legal support, you can search with those criteria. And then at the bottom right is a link to our website where you can find out more about us. And if you're looking for that Design to Disrupt banking paper that I mentioned, just visit the publications page on our website and you can download that report. You'll also find there a guide called Support My Economic Safety, which is really for any organisation that's starting to think about its responses to economic abuse. And the training video I mentioned, that's also available via the website. That's on the videos page. So ultimately, what we want and envisage is a world free of economic abuse. And in the meantime, we want to see a world where women like Lily and thousands of others like her have better support for their economic safety. Thank you for making the time to join this webinar.
Thanks so much, Rebecca. There's a comment in the chat. So thank you, Kate. I was going to say we can share the links for people who weren't able to use the QR code on the screen. So excellent. Thank you, Rebecca, for all of those resources, which I think people find very beneficial, and talking through especially the full costs of economic abuse, which is pretty staggering when you take all of those factors into consideration. I'd next like to introduce the Robert Fitzgerald, who is the New South Wales Ageing and Disability Commissioner, and the Commission works to protect older people and adults with disability from abuse, neglect and exploitation. Robert's a lawyer by profession and has served as a Community and Disability Services Commissioner and Deputy Ombudsman in New South Wales. He also served as a Commissioner with the Productivity Commission for more than 10 years. Sorry, Robert. Robert serves on the board of many non-government organisations, including Social Ventures Australia and Caritas Australia. He was also the inaugural chair of the Australian Charities and Not-for-Profit Commission. Thank you, Robert, for joining us today.
Good, thanks, Tanya. And I'm by far the oldest on this panel, and that's fine. Maybe there's some wisdom in it, maybe not. Look, it's a great joy to be presenting from the land of the Parramatta people here in Parramatta, and to share the platform with Rebecca and Hannah and Tanya. More than 40 years ago, I was involved in as a volunteer with the St Vincent de Paul Society when I was going through university and for years after. And on one evening when we were visiting very dysfunctional and poor families in the inner city of Sydney, some of the most desperate families and individuals, I arrived at a house of an older woman. And shortly before I had arrived, it was in Waterloo, her son had in fact threatened her with a screwdriver against her neck. And if she didn't hand over the money, her age pension effectively, he would do her harm. At that time, I don't think I would have called it elder abuse or financial abuse or anything. And it was certainly a time when she didn't want her son reported. And there's no doubt at all that from time to time, that same incident would have been repeated. Hence her reliance on charities. But where would she go? Who would take those issues into account? A second one occurred in Newtown, and again, another elderly woman who was being threatened by her son to give a bank guarantee in relation to a new business venture that he wanted. The chances of him being successful in that venture would have been less than 5 or 10%. Against all the advice, I have no doubt she would have provided that guarantee, and she would have lost the very meagre additional resources she had to survive. It's ironic that more than 40 years later, I head up the Ageing Disability Commission, which is about preventing and responding to the abuse of older people, both men and women, and of course adults with disability. And in the work we do over the last 4.5 years as a new agency, a small agency, we've been able to track over nearly 40,000 calls to our helpline and over 14,000 statutory reports that have been made. And it won't surprise you that firstly, the majority of those, 2/3, in fact 3/4 really nowadays, are in relation to abuse of older people, and the 1/4 in relation to people with disability. The second thing is in relation to those that are affected. 67% of older people that have been reported are women. And in relation to disability, it's a bit different. It's about 52%, where there's a much greater equity in your sense between men and women in terms of the abuse that occurs. One of the things that is interesting, however, is that financial abuse does rate highly, but also alongside psychological abuse. As has already been described, it's very rare for financial abuse to exist outside of psychological abuse or coercive control, whether that's by an intimate family member or more generally a family member or carer. And in relation to older people, the financial abuse is the second highest level of abuse. About 28% of all of our allegations for older people are in relation to financial abuse. In relation to disability, it's a little less, it's at 18%. But of course, we deal with abuse that is sexual, physical, exploitation, as well as neglect. But I think that what would surprise you is who are the alleged abusers. In the space of older people and people with disability, it's quite different to what you might hear today. So just let's listen to the figures in relation to older people and the abusers. Adult sons, 26%. Adult daughters, 24%. Husband or male partners, 6%. Female or spouses, female or wives, 5%. And so in relation to the actual perpetrators of older women and women with disabilities, in fact, it's almost equal between men and women, sons and daughters, husbands and wives, who actually commit these alleged abuses. If you look into disability, and again, these are people with disability between the age of 18 and 64. Just listen to this. The abusers are mothers, 18%, fathers, 9%. Husbands, 6%. Brothers, 5%. Sisters, 6%. So the nature of abuse of older women and women with disability is quite different to that which we find in younger cohorts who are non-disabled. And that's an interesting pattern, and it shows that the drivers of this abuse is slightly different. So what could some of that abuse be caused from? In relation to financial abuse of older women, I think there's a number of factors. First, it's pre-existing financial vulnerability, which Rebecca's talked about, and I'm sure Hannah will as well. There's no doubt that women enter older age in a much more financially vulnerable position. And that's evident in itself in the first time ever increasing levels of homelessness amongst older women and enormous housing stress amongst all older people, but particularly housing stress for women. And so that creates a huge vulnerability in which risk of harm can occur. It's also the fact that for people entering about 75 years of age, we've got the combination of frailty, dependency, and cognitive decline. Whether it's dementia or some other form of decline, these three factors are with us for the foreseeable future. And there will be simply more older women who have those three conditions at the age of between 70 and 75, and therefore the risks are high. Carer stress, particularly if the carer has problem gambling or drug dependency. Let me assure you, if the carer is a problem gambler, they will steal your money. No questions, no ifs, and no buts. And drug dependency, whether it's alcohol or otherwise, is a huge risk factor. Neglect where the carer is incapable of looking after an older woman or a person with a disability creates its own levels of risk. And then, of course, as you'd be aware, there's inheritance impatience, where the children won't wait for their inheritance and wish to take it now, or inheritance maintenance, where they don't steal the inheritance, but they won't let you spend your money on yourself, including for health and other services, so that the inheritance doesn't get whittled down. They're the big drivers around financial abuse of older women. For women with disability, it's a little bit different. It's coercive control by family members and, to a smaller degree, partners. Many parents are unable to accept that young people move from being children with disability to adults with disability. And the highest level of abuse occurs around the age of 25 years, largely by parents and siblings. A lack of financial understanding for many people with cognitive or intellectual disabilities. The transference of decision-making far too early and to people that are not necessarily trustworthy, and the inability to determine that. And the last one, of course, is now increased money within the NDIS. Nobody really tried to steal from people with disabilities except for their disability support pensions. Now there's considerable money available through the NDIS, and we're seeing increased levels of abuse taking place. So the drivers for elder abuse and the drivers of abuse for women with disabilities are slightly different, but nevertheless, our agency is about trying to prevent that to the extent possible, but also to deal with that. And through our helpline, through our community supports area, through our investigations, we work intensively with the families, the carers, but most importantly, the older woman or the woman with a disability. And our jurisdiction is what's called will and preference. By law, I'm required to take into account the views and wishes of the older woman or the woman with a disability in everything we do, even to the point that if we're going to investigate a matter, I need their consent. But just some key issues just to think about. The first one I've mentioned is housing stress. Housing stress is and will continue to play an enormous key risk factor. And this is affecting both the carers and the person themselves. During the pandemic, a whole lot of rearrangements in family living arrangements took place. Families moved in with their grandparents or their parents, and conversely, older people moved into their families. In many senses, that was caused by family stress, and that family stress is continuing to be felt today and in some circumstances being exacerbated. It was also related to the transfer of decision-making control through the powers of attorney and enduring powers of attorney being provided. And today we deal with multiple family dysfunction where either the older person wishes to leave or they wish to throw out the family members who won't now leave. Nevertheless, at the heart of this is financial abuse, often very common, as I said, with all other forms of abuse. The second one is the increasing abuse of guarantors and powers of attorney. We have a system where powers of attorney in Australia are well used, enduring powers of attorney in particular, and yet many of the people giving the powers of attorney, the women, have little understanding of what they're actually giving away and the nature of those powers of attorney, and even less the person receiving the power of attorney, has little understanding of their duties and responsibilities. And of course, worse than that, there's no other way that we know what are valid powers of attorney, because if somebody revokes a power of attorney, for the rest of the world, it looks as if the original person that holds that attorney is in fact still capable of making decisions. But we are seeing an increasing level of attorneys, in fact, creating and causing the financial abuse that we're seeing. Coercion in decision-making around living arrangements, I've referred to already. One of the big post-pandemic environments at the moment is unsatisfactory accommodation arrangements. And it's very, very hard to move people out of your house or, in fact, to move. And, of course, one of the great tragedies has been the granny flats, where people have obviously with well intention provided very large sums to their children for a granny flat to be built, only for the granny to be removed from the flat, or making her life so difficult that she will ultimately leaving the granny flat to the children, but not for her well-being. A couple of other ones just to mention is particularly abuse of women in coal communities. And here we face a number of very significant issues. Women being forced into caring roles without support. The notion that the eldest daughter, particularly if she doesn't have any children, will automatically become the carer often leaves that woman stranded in a role that she's not well suited for. And family members who will say to you, we always support our elderly people, but what they're doing is just telling her how to do her job with very little support. And this creates both financial abuse and risks of neglect. A lack of understanding of abuse within some of the communities themselves, particularly where there's patriarchal decision-making around money. Where is a normal decision-making process for that cultural group compared to an abusive relationship? Shame inhibiting the discussion and reporting of abuse, including financial abuse. I can't tell you not to feel shame. I've been around abuse all my life in the sense of the work that I've done and the volunteering work that I've done. I can't tell you not to feel shame, but I can work with you so that shame doesn't become a barrier for the ongoing continuation of abuse in that family, or for the lack of reporting of that abuse where it occurs. And of course, cultural and spiritual leaders failing to permit discussion of abuse, or worse, failing permitting the reporting of it. We've had lots of history of that in Australia. And many of those issues are still present within Indigenous communities, where humbugging and other forms of financial abuse are rife. The good news is there's been groups like the Kimberley Birds that have done videos and reports about humbugging, particularly of women in their own communities, and so too in other states. But there's been very little work done in New South Wales in relation to that particular issue. And lastly, retirement villages. I'll give you an example of that. Recently, an older woman was in a retirement village. A male resident in the retirement village befriended her almost as a carer, in no other ways. Ultimately, he was able to manipulate her financially. He took $380,000 from her, using it to pay off his own debts and debts to the retirement village, and left her very penniless. He's now being charged. She's in the retirement village. He's been exited. But that sort of abuse in retirement villages occurs. The greatest level of abuse in retirement villages is by fellow residents. And so putting all that aside, for one moment, what do we do about it? And a bit like what Rebecca was just saying, we've got a suite of toolkits that we use in the education of community groups, in the education of frontline workers, home care workers, community workers, disability support workers who see this abuse taking place, but also working with groups about what we call a My Wellbeing checklist, trying to get the individual to ask the right questions, just like Rebecca was talking about. Do I know how much money I have in my bank account? Do I have the freedom to spend my money? Do I have the freedom to see family and friends when I want? Do I attend social activities? Do I receive medical attention when I need it? Do I have a say about my healthcare plans and treatment? Am I treated respectfully by my family and friends? And most importantly, do I feel safe at home? So the Commission exists to try to prevent and reduce abuse within our community. It exists to try to respond in a very thorough way of trying to create an environment where a person can be safe, and that's about trying to change the family and service dynamics as well as the legal position. But ultimately, it's about empowering older women and women with disabilities so that they can resist, to the extent that is possible, the pressures that might be exerted from time to time. And of course, the most important thing about the Commission is the helpline. And that helpline used to be the Elder Abuse Helpline in New South Wales, and it got merged into the Commission 4 years ago, and it's now called the New South Wales Ageing and Disability Abuse Helpline. And it is what it says, it's here to help. It's not an intake line. The minute you ring, we start the process of trying to work with people that have contacted us, family, friends, carers, or the individual themselves. And the most important thing we do is to try to ensure people are safe and have the right to live free of abuse into the future. Thanks very much.
Thank you very much, Commissioner Fitzgerald. I'd like to now introduce Dr. Hannah Tonkin. Dr. Hannah Tonkin commenced her role as the inaugural New South Wales Women's Safety Commissioner in February 2023. In this role, she provides leadership on whole-of-government policies and programs on domestic, family and sexual violence. Previously, Dr. Tonkin worked at the Australian Human Rights Commission and as a barrister in London and Adelaide. Thank you very much for joining us today, Dr. Tonkin.
Thank you. Well, good afternoon, everyone. It's such a pleasure to be here with you today. I'm joining this webinar from Gadigal land in Sydney, and I pay my respects to Elders past and present, and to all First Nations people joining us today on this webinar. I'd also like to thank Women New South Wales, especially Tanya, for the invitation to speak today. It's been a fantastic panel so far, and it's a real privilege to join the experts on this panel to talk about the important issue of economic abuse. Most of you are probably aware that last Saturday, the 25th of November, was the International Day for the Elimination of Violence Against Women. And that also marked the start of the 16 Days of Activism against gender-based violence. So this is a really important period for my role as Women's Safety Commissioner in New South Wales. And on Friday night, I attended a really powerful vigil in Orange in regional New South Wales, which was to honour all the women in Australia who have lost their lives, who've had their lives taken by domestic and family violence. And at the vigil, pairs of empty shoes were laid out to remember and honour every victim from the past year. And that image of all those empty shoes, it's haunting me, and it will continue to haunt me long after the event. And as I continue to reflect on that vigil, I'd just like to pay tribute to the strength and resilience of all victim survivors of domestic and family violence, including any victim survivors joining this webinar. And yesterday, as you know, was the 26th of November, Economic Abuse Awareness Day. And it's fitting that Economic Abuse Awareness Day came immediately after the International Day for the Elimination of Violence Against Women. We know that most violence against women takes place in a home rather than in a public place. And we certainly have data from the Australian Bureau of Statistics showing that that's clearly the case in Australia. And we also know that domestic and family violence takes place in a broader context of power and control. And that so often includes economic abuse. So this is all inextricably linked. And I'll talk about this a bit later, those links between these different issues. And against that broader backdrop, today's webinar is so important and it's so timely. As Tanya said, I started as the first New South Wales Women's Safety Commissioner around 9 months ago in February this year, and I'm tasked with spearheading a whole of government approach to domestic and family violence. So I work across the whole government, and I also work very closely with the community sector, the private sector, and the broader community so that we can have a more holistic approach to women's safety. And one of my priorities as Commissioner is to hear directly from people with lived experience of domestic, family and sexual violence, and to make sure that their voices are heard and that their perspectives are incorporated in government policies and programs. And that certainly includes those who have experienced or continue to experience economic abuse. My job title is Women's Safety Commissioner, and that's intended to recognise that there are clear gendered dynamics at play here, and these have real effects on people. Of course, everyone's safety is important, but men and women experience violence and abuse in different ways. I mentioned earlier the Australian Bureau of Statistics. Their recent personal safety survey showed that women are far more likely than men to experience violence at the hands of someone they know, usually an intimate partner. And the violence experienced by women usually takes place in a home rather than a public place. And women are also more than twice as likely as men to experience economic abuse by a cohabiting partner. So that was in the latest personal safety survey. These survey results do show that, unfortunately, there's a real need for my role of Women's Safety Commissioner. But my job title is Women's Safety Commissioner, but I'm not taking a strict binary approach to these issues. I'm working very closely with LGBTQIA+ organisations to ensure that I take a really inclusive approach to my work and to women's safety. Now, when I talk about women's safety, this is a broad umbrella term, and it certainly includes economic safety. And as I mentioned earlier, it's really important for us to understand that women's physical safety is inextricably linked to economic safety and security. For example, in terms of the links between domestic and family violence and economic safety and security, we know that many women feel compelled to stay in abusive relationships for economic reasons. They simply can't afford to leave, and they often have nowhere else to go, and certainly nowhere to live. So for some women, they faced a really stark choice between violence at home and poverty and even homelessness if they leave. Many women who do manage to leave return for economic reasons, and many women who manage to leave permanently end up facing serious economic consequences and often living in poverty. The work of Dr. Anne Summers has been absolutely vital in demonstrating this connection between domestic and family violence and women's economic insecurity. And we also know that rates of domestic and family violence are higher when people face economic instability and financial insecurity. So these are all really closely connected. But today we're talking specifically about economic abuse in relationships, and a particular area of focus for me is the financial abuse of women in the context of intimate partner relationships. And we know that financial abuse also occurs in other relationships, and the Ageing and Disability Commissioner just explained how this is particularly pertinent for older people and for people with disability. So that's really important to note. But now I would like to zoom in on the situation of women facing financial abuse in intimate partner relationships. And in this context, financial abuse is essentially a pattern of control, exploitation, or sabotage of money and finances. And it undermines a person's financial security and it limits their potential for self-sufficiency. Research has shown that coercing, deceiving, or pressuring an intimate partner to take on debt is one relatively common form of financial abuse, so this coerced debt. Examples might include a person forcing their partner to take on liability for a car loan, for credit cards, for mobile phone contracts, while actually that person is retaining exclusive use of the assets themselves in many cases. This is the very common but lesser known STD, sexually transmitted debt. Now, coerce, debt and bad credit scores can then often prevent victim survivors from securing housing, from getting a credit card, from starting their own business or gaining employment in the future. So this can make it almost impossible to leave the relationship, and it can push a victim survivor, most often a woman, into poverty if they do manage to leave. The lifelong impacts of financial abuse require holistic and trauma-informed service responses. And since I started as Women's Safety Commissioner, I've been speaking with hundreds of victim survivors, frontline workers, policy experts, researchers, business leaders, a really wide range of people. It's become clear to me that women's economic safety and security, including this issue of economic abuse, will be a key priority for me as Women's Safety Commissioner. And that leads me directly to discuss coercive control, particularly in the context of intimate partner relationships. So to put it simply, coercive control is a pattern of controlling and manipulative behaviours within a relationship over a period of time. So this coercive control can include financial abuse, emotional, psychological abuse, spiritual abuse, as well as physical and sexual violence, although sometimes there's no physical or sexual violence at all. And the effect of these behaviours cumulatively essentially denies the victim survivor their autonomy and their independence. It's really insidious. Today, I'll focus on coercive control in intimate partner relationships, but it is important to note once again that coercive control also occurs in other close relationships. So, for example, between different family members, and Commissioner Fitzgerald explained that so eloquently. So examples of coercive control in a relationship could be behaviours like isolating you from your support system, monitoring your activity throughout the day, controlling aspects of your health and your body, making you doubt your own truth, your own sanity. And really importantly for our purposes today, coercive control can also involve limiting your access to money and controlling your finances. And this is a way of restricting your freedom and limiting your ability to leave a relationship. And financial control is often used to keep a person really disempowered. So it could be limiting your access to bank accounts, hiding financial resources from you, putting you on a really strict budget that barely even covers the essentials, preventing you from having a credit card. There's a really wide range of these behaviours, and they can all form part of a pattern of coercive control. And here in New South Wales, new laws were passed last November that criminalise coercive control as a standalone offence, and that applies in the context of a current or former intimate partner relationship in New South Wales. That makes New South Wales the first Australian state or territory to introduce a standalone offence of coercive control. Queensland has since introduced laws to criminalise coercive control, and South Australia is also currently considering a draft bill. Now, in New South Wales, the law was passed in November last year, but it won't come into effect until July next year. And essentially, the new offence will apply when one person in a current or former intimate partner relationship engages in a course of conduct of abusive behaviour that's intended to coerce or control the other person. There's a very long implementation period between the laws being passed last November and coming into effect in July next year. And that was deliberate because it was intended to allow time to train the key actors in the criminal justice system, so the police, lawyers, prosecutors, judges, so that they can be trained on the new laws before they come into effect, and also to train frontline workers in the domestic and family violence sector, and to allow time to raise awareness of coercive control in the broader community. So you might have seen videos coming up in your feed, like what is coercive control as you scroll through the internet. The New South Wales government has launched a website recently that's intended to raise awareness and educate the public on this issue. So you can find this really easily through a Google search, and we'll also share a link. We can paste it in the chat and share a link on the page. This is a really good starting point, this website, to seek information on the issue. There's also a lot of useful information provided by the federal government that's on the Commonwealth Attorney General's website, and we will also share that link. So I would encourage you all to look at these resources and learn more about coercive control and help to raise awareness across the broader community. So once again, I'd like to thank Women New South Wales for organising this webinar and for inviting me to participate, and for encouraging us all to mark Economic Abuse Awareness Day. I would encourage everyone on this webinar to help us raise awareness of economic abuse in the community. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Dr. Tonkin. We've got some time now for some Q&A. So we have had a few questions in the chat, but if people could continue to post those. So the first one, Dr. Tonkin, is Lorraine has asked if your role also includes the education sector.
Yeah, that's a great question. So my role is intended to work across the whole government. So that includes education, yes. And a key focus of mine is to have more attention on primary prevention of violence and abuse, and education is so important when we're talking about prevention in particular. So I'm looking at how we can strengthen our respectful relationships education in schools, for example. Rebecca Glenn mentioned perhaps incorporating more financial or some financial literacy information, aspects of learning about financial behaviours in relationships, including that in education, for example. That's something I'm very open to. And looking also at respectful relationships education for even younger children in an age-appropriate way, and how we can improve that across New South Wales. That's certainly something that's really important for me.
Thank you so much. There's a second question for you, Dr. Tonkin. Is the Women's Safety Commissioner working on anything in regards to women's safety in public spaces?
Yes, I am. So I launched, in conjunction with Transport for New South Wales, a couple of weeks ago, we launched Your Ground New South Wales, and we can put a link to that in the chat. That's an online interactive map that enables you to go online on the map, and you can say whether you feel safe or unsafe in that particular spot and explain why. So that's open to women and gender diverse people across New South Wales for the next 3 months. And the idea is to collect data. It's anonymous, so collect anonymous data across New South Wales that will give government some really important insights into perceptions of safety and where we could improve safety through, for example, design of public spaces, lighting, but also education about behaviours in public spaces. So that's a really important aspect of my work as Women's Safety Commissioner, addressing safety in public spaces, because there was a survey last year by Transport for New South Wales that showed that almost 1 in 3 women said they don't feel, 2 in 3 women, 2 in 3 women said they don't feel safe after dark in public spaces in New South Wales. So we're looking at what we can do to address that.
Excellent. Thank you very much. The next question I can see, I think, Rebecca, might be a good one for you. Could there be more work on the issue of a partner signing up as a director on businesses without knowledge of their partner, and then things going wrong with the business? And the family home, potentially in both names, may need to be sold to pay the business debt, which is unfair when generally the woman had no knowledge of the house being put up as part of the business and hadn't signed any documents as director.
Yeah, this is a particularly devastating and not uncommon scenario that we are seeing, and there's some excellent work happening out of the Financial Abuse Service at Redfern Legal Centre, particularly around that company directorship and how to try to disentangle and see justice for women who have been signed up without their knowledge as directors of businesses. I think this, more broadly as a non-lawyer, where I go to around an issue like this is what are the ways the existing system has been built on the assumption that, people are in healthy relationships and free to make informed decisions, and it's not that easy to fraudulently sign up your partner, all of which we know is not true. But that is the way many of our systems have been designed. So what would that system look like? How would it look different if we were to go back to the start and design it with people with lived experience at the table? I don't know, but certainly I would be looking at that kind of reform where we use those insights to think about the systems differently. There are a range of things that can be done with some legal assistance once someone realises that's what's happened to them. But I think we all agree that, the amount of time and effort and money that's involved in that kind of disentangling, we really would prefer to see it much more difficult to happen in the first place.
So, Tanya, I might just make a comment there. We're convening a group of the police, legal aid, New South Wales Law Society ourselves, based on our experience, to look at whether or not the laws that relate to abuse generally, financial abuse in particular, are adequate in New South Wales, particularly in relation to the groups we're talking about. There's no presumption in that. The question is, are the laws themselves adequate, or is there simply some impediment to them being applied appropriately? Or do we need certain laws? And I can give you a couple of examples of that. One is in relation to powers of attorney. It's increasingly clear that there's almost no penalty for a person that's appointed as a power of attorney if they in fact abuse the duty of care or the responsibilities under that power of attorney. A second one is a really difficult issue is even if the financial abuse occurs and you investigate it, what are the mechanisms by which you can get the money back? In Victoria, you can go to the equivalent of our NCAT, VCAT, their tribunal, and get certain orders. Here you've got to go to the Supreme Court. Is there a better way of trying to get financial restitution if the money exists? A third one is, how do you get rid of unwanted relatives? It's a serious problem. And whilst it may be, there might be other elements of abuse, the one thing is it's actually a huge financial abuse. And we see that in many communities. So I think there's work to be done now that we have robust evidence, evidence coming from all different sources. So I think that's a piece of work that'll happen in the next 12 months or so, without presuming what it should be. But clearly the work we're doing, clear work that others are doing, indicates that there is some improvement that is needed without creating a maze of legal complexities which actually serve almost no purpose. So what are the essential things in the law that either need to be improved, or are there new laws? And that's the challenge, I think, in New South Wales going forward.
Thank you, Commissioner Fitzgerald. Somebody asked a question in the chat actually about powers of attorney. So are there plans to have a register of powers of attorney? I know people who have repeatedly used powers of attorney to coercively control older people. A register would flag people who repeatedly use this to take older people's money.
The answer is there should be a register of powers of attorney. In New South Wales, there is a register for powers of attorney in relation to real estate. You can't use a power of attorney in relation to real estate unless it's been registered. But unfortunately, the 9 governments of Australia, the Commonwealth and the states and territories, have now decided not to establish a national register. And what they have decided to do is to try to get some sort of commonality, consistency between the laws around powers of attorney in the 9 governments. So right at the moment, there's no national movement for a register. I think at New South Wales level, there should be consideration of extending the register beyond the current terms. I mean, the problem we've got at the moment is nobody knows whether a power of attorney has been given. Nobody knows whether it's been revoked. It's quite possible for someone to have revoked a couple of powers of attorney, but the attorneys are still wandering around as if they're valid documents. That just doesn't seem right. And the level of abuse in relation to powers of attorney are increasing. And that's going to just get more and more as we see more and more older people entering into those arrangements. So no register at this stage, but I think in New South Wales we can do things. And across the country, consistency in powers of attorney is a step forward, but really not a very strong one.
Thank you. And I might put the next question to you, and then potentially others might want to jump in. So where is the best place or first point of contact for people in culturally and linguistically diverse communities to go for support about financial abuse? Is there other language supports?
So we work with a range of peak bodies, both in the disability and ageing sector. We have a strategy which is very much about incorporating the organisations that already connect with multicultural communities in New South Wales in those two sectors. And third thing we have a collaboratives. We support 18 collaboratives around New South Wales, which are made up of the local government, police, public health authorities, and all of the community service organisations that operate in those collaborative areas, and we're going to grow those. So we're trying to say that in the organisations that you normally deal with, they may well be a point where you can make first contact. The truth of the matter is that would be a bit ad hoc at the moment, but nevertheless, that's our desire. The one thing we know about multicultural communities is you have to deal with the communities, organisations with whom they deal. The second is through our own website, through our website or through the helpline. We are grossly underrepresented in the reporting by COL communities for the reasons that I articulated earlier. Nevertheless, our connections into those communities are very strong. So if in doubt, you can simply ring us and we can arrange for an appropriate response. But our hope is that over time we start to develop the agencies so that they can respond to calls and concerns in their own community. At the end of the day, however, we are the only agency that you can report a matter to apart from the police. So if it gets to a point where it needs to be reported so that we can make the environment safer for the individual, change the family dynamics and arrangements, increase the service level, and perhaps have legal supports in place, eventually it will need to come to us, or if it's a criminal matter, obviously to the police. The good news is there's lots and lots of organisations out there now that are looking at elder abuse and abuse of people with disabilities, including in the culturally diverse communities, and that's a very, very good thing. DCJ itself is doing lots of good work in that space, and the work that you've been hearing today from Rebecca and Hannah. So I think we are moving in the right direction.
Yeah,
Thank you.
From the Centre for Women's Economic Safety perspective, there are local organisations that are often, have very strong links with communities that are well placed. But we also know sometimes that can have the opposite effect, that I know too many people in that community, and so I'm actually seeking support outside of my own community. And so we're a small organisation. We do what we can. We do offer the translating and interpreting service for our money clinics, so that anyone, whatever language background, can avail themselves of that service. And we also publish on our website, we have a financial safety checklist that's available in 8 languages, one of them being English. So that, I think we've already shared the CWES website address, but the financial safety checklist is a page on its own. You can find those other language
and I could
supports.
just relate to what Rebecca said, just in the cultural communities and Aboriginal communities and Torres Strait Islander communities, there has to be the availability for them to access mainstream services. In all the work that I've done, there's a very substantial group of people within those communities who do not believe it's safe to actually go to an organisation run by that community, that group. And so we will always need both organisations, both culturally diverse and Indigenous organisations that can respond to these issues, but there'll also have to be readily accessibility to mainstream agencies. And it's our duty to make sure we're accessible to all of those groups over time.
Thank you. The next question, I think, will be for Dr. Tonkin. What can victims of coercive control do while waiting for the laws to come into effect?
Yeah, that's a great question. As I said, their laws don't come into effect until July next year, but there are some really important things to note. First of all, criminalisation certainly won't address the issue for most people. So I think it's important to note that it only applies in current and former intimate partner relationships. So any other type of relationship, the new laws won't apply to. But even for current and former intimate relationships, it's going to take some time for these prosecutions to flow through the system So the important thing is to get support if you need it now. So supports are available to get support to understand what's happening. And the other thing, for if you are wanting to pursue a criminal prosecution, there are a number of laws in New South Wales at the moment that would cover many of these behaviours. So, for example, there are laws against stalking, laws against intimidation, laws against different types of physical violence, sexual violence, different laws that could potentially cover the behaviour that are already in effect. So it might, if you're wanting to report it to the police, it might still be possible to prosecute now under the laws as they exist. But if it is something that wants to be prosecuted as coercive control, then that will only come into effect in July, and then it needs to be part of a pattern of behaviour. So it's important to be keeping records and putting together a sort of a pattern of behaviour. The most important thing, I think, now is just to seek the support that you need.
Thank you. So maybe this is for Rebecca. Financial abuse can see the target unable to afford private litigation, but they often don't meet legal aid requirements. Self-representation is almost impossible given the complexity of coercive control. What is the government's stance on addressing this? So maybe also for you, Dr. Tonkin.
Yes, obviously I can't respond in terms of what the government stance is, but there are, this is just so common as an issue that, we're told to go and get legal advice. Legal advice often is unaffordable. You're often not eligible for the legal aid. Self-representing, which so many women do, takes an enormous toll as well. I can't speak for what that's going to look like in terms of the criminal law in New South Wales. Certainly from the family law perspective, I'd be very keen to see an overhaul of family law that started again from scratch potentially, however realistic or not realistic that is. But we've got to do better about supporting women to have legal advice, relevant legal advice, through that family law system. I think the same applies in the criminal law courts. I don't know what the answer is. I'd love to see what the government's got to say about that. But legal advice is just out of bounds, out of reach for so many people.
So can I just make a comment there? I think the time we're in is a really challenging one because there isn't any answers. And one of the challenges that there is now a community of practice of adult safeguarding units like ourselves in South Australia, ACT, both Queensland and Victoria, public advocates have recommended the establishment of a body such as our own. But the challenge is, as financial abuse increases for the multiple reasons, including inheritance in patients, we're going to see more and more and more reports of financial abuse. The banks are doing a very good job of picking it up. Your organisations are doing a very good job of raising awareness. The truth is we have no coherent public policy response anywhere at this stage. So my discussions with government in New South Wales, but I think this is a conversation happening around the whole of Australia, is we now have to put in place the necessary elements that will allow us to be able to respond when this tsunami actually comes our way. So if it's big now, it's nothing compared to what's going to come down in the next sort of decade. But the truth is, anyone that says, "Oh, we've got the answer," is not there yet. And we are good at coming up with answers. So I think public policy will respond. But we're really at the beginning of what is a very substantial increase in the level of real financial abuse and the reporting of that financial abuse. And our public policy response is not yet robust enough to deal with that. But that is true right across Australia.
Thank you. I think there's a bit of a statement here rather than a question. I've seen inappropriate treatment of women in politics. How can we make the cultural change if our leaders have no consequence for mistreating women? There has been some work that has been established. There was a couple of reviews, so one being the Broderick review, and we can post a link. I think there's some information public around a review into bullying, harassment and sexual misconduct in New South Wales Parliament, and that was published in August 2022. So change is slow, but there is action occurring in that space. Do I have any more questions? A good one maybe for Dr. Tonkin. It's awesome that we're educating young boys and men, but how are we educating men over 50 to stop them using systems to sustain pervasive economic abuse?
That's a fantastic question. Because I talked when I was talking about prevention about young people and children, and I think that is really important in the long run to shift attitudes. But you're right that a lot of the abuse that's being perpetuated now is amongst older people in Australia and perpetuated by older men. So I agree that a lot more needs to be done with that cohort. It can be difficult. Other than we need some public awareness raising campaigns that can reach broader audiences, so awareness raising campaigns that are not just reaching people who would tune into this sort of webinar, but actually reaching more broadly different audiences. That's really crucial, and certainly addressing that older age group. One way we've been discussing is perhaps offering things like financial literacy workshops that can weave in education about this type of thing. But yeah, we're certainly brainstorming how you can reach different groups and different target audiences with these messages. It's a real challenge, and I'm sure it's something Rebecca has been thinking about as well in her work.
Yeah, and again, no easy answers on that one. But coming back to that, what does a healthy money relationship look like? I think that and there's a lot of behavioural science behind how we think and feel about money. And so we anchor to the things that we know that we've done. And so we often end up in these, and I'm not saying this is the same in an abusive situation, but often relationships, you remember what you spent money on, but you might not remember what they spent money on. They remember what they spent. And so we're actually not even at the same table having a real conversation about valuing each other's work, valuing each other's time, the different types of contributions that individuals make to a household. So I think that there's something about at that very basic level in the general population learning to have those money conversations, learning about what money means to us as individuals, because it also means different things, and so the values that we're bringing to those conversations can colour those conversations. So I think that bigger piece is let's get more comfortable having healthy conversations about money in relationships is part of it. Only a small part, but it's part of it.
Thank you. So we've reached a close now. I think we've answered all of the questions in the chat. So I wanted to thank all of the attendees for coming here today to learn more about this topic. Thank our wonderful speakers and their generous contribution today, and my team for setting up and facilitating this webinar. So we will send you an email shortly, and we'll include some of those links that we've had here in the chat. And we'll have a short request for some feedback that we'll use for future evaluation. So thank you, everybody. Really appreciate you all taking the time to be here today. Have a wonderful afternoon.